in various elements of the Upanishadic thought, right, and the Yoga Sutra, we have this idea that consciousness is indivisible, right? It is indivisible, it is foundational, it is fundamental to nature itself, right? In Advaita Vedanta, Atman, right? Atman, which is equated to Brahman, which we spoke of earlier, is identified as pure consciousness, right? Sankhya looks at consciousness in terms of the dualism, right? Purusha, Prakriti, right? Purusha is the conceptual, the spiritual aspect of it, and Prakriti is, of course, the more empirical, the worldly side of things. And so consciousness actually is looked at as many. In Sankhya, if you look at classical Sankhya system, the Purusha has a multiplicity. It is not just one, right? Like in the Advaitin thought, so to say. So if you talk about the hard problem, and you go to a seer or a sage or a philosopher of Indian knowledge systems, they would call it a false dichotomy, right? They would say that, well, it is not a product of the brain, number one, right? It has a deeper unified reality that must be looked at in that manner, right? And the scientist would probably retort back saying that, what is your premise of saying that, right? Because what is very important to understand here is that the conceptual is not always translated into the worldly sense, right? There is sometimes an element of distinction, so to say. It is not always measurable, right, in parametrized form all the way, right? So in the Shiva Strotavali, for instance, there is this idea of na dhyato na japataha, right? So for instance, it says that can be understood through the meditation or the practice of, japa, for instance, and swadhyasya vividha purvakam, right? Evameva Shiva Bhasatam Numo Bhakti Shalinam, right? So here you're talking about the Shiva as something that you can realize from Swadhyay, of course, from the Dhyato or the Japata aspect of it as well, from the meditation, right, that looks at introspection, right, and trying to connect with one's own self. Then you have philosophers such as Nagarjuna, right, who talks about consciousness as empty of inherent, existence. And he looks at consciousness from a more via negativa approach, which is basically the idea that what it is not, right? What it is not, or in Bharatiya Gyan Parambara, we talk about neti, right? What it is not this, right? And when we have negated all that it is not, right, we probably end up with what it actually is, right? So there is this element of how we go about it in a logical manner, which is very fascinating in itself. And then finally, when you talk about Kashmiri Shaivavad, I mean, I've already spoken about the Shiva Strotavali earlier. But this idea is that there is obviously no byproduct of brain activity or information processing at all, right? And it is basically in the non-dual Shiva, right? The non-dual reality of Shiva, which comes out manifesting through Shakti, right? The energy aspect of Shakti, and that transcends the empirical methods and yet gives rise to what we see around us, right? So this has been mentioned in the Ishvara Pratyabhignya Karika as well, right? I'll just highlight some of the terms that are out there. Kartari Gyatari, right? Kartari Gyatari, which is basically that it is transcending some of these aspects of, doability or knowability, so to say, and yet is kind of undertaking the agency or undertaking those activities as well, right, in the manifestation that we see around us, right? And then nishedham va siddhim va vidita kaha, right? So in this, we are looking at the different ways in which the attainments or the ways in which the spiritual realization is seen as a method to access that ultimate reality, so to say, right? So this is a very important aspect which comes out in the Ishvara Pratyabhignya Karika. Okay.